Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bite Size Nutrition Podcast. I'm Gillian, and today we are going to talk about mentally calculating calories and how to get out of the pattern of immediately thinking about how many calories are in food when you're trying to choose what to eat. And this is something that I often work with clients on in coaching because even if they're not necessarily tracking macros or like actively counting, sometimes we get into this mental habit of thinking about, okay, well, this has more calories than this, or like if I eat this and there's this many calories, and it becomes this like ongoing sort of mental chatter that doesn't actually let us enjoy food. And I resonate with this a lot myself because when I tracked macros for many years, food kind of became, it's almost like, so if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, you know that when you like see the Matrix, it's like the zeros and the ones, right? And after macro tracking for a really long time, it got to a point where I knew so many calorie counts by heart. So many, I knew exactly how many grams of protein were in like this food and grams of carbs were in this food. And so it got to a point where I wasn't necessarily able to just enjoy food. I would just see things as like protein, fat, and carbs, which can take a lot of the joy and the ease out of eating. And also, it makes it hard to eat truly mindfully because you've got in the back of your head, you've got these sort of like numbers and the, protein, fat, and carbs, this like categorization going on. And recently, it's, as I said, this is something that I've been working on with quite a few clients. And when we talk about how they want to feel in, for example, social situations, or how they want to feel when they have certain foods at home, is they want to feel like they can just enjoy the food without it being anything else, without it being this big deal. And part of that is being able to just eat the food without the extra calorie calculations going on in your head, right? And so we're going to talk today about, well, how do you stop mentally calculating calories when it's become this mental habit? And I've got four/5 steps here. It's really 5 steps, but you'll understand why I say 4/5. So the first step is allowing ourselves to recognize the other functions of food and why we eat, right? Outside of food is just fuel. Food is not just fuel. We're going to talk about that in a second. The second step is to think your brain and notice, like when these thoughts come up, oh, this is just a thought. This is just a mental event, right? The third thing is to give our minds other criteria to focus on when we're thinking about food, whether that's taste, whether that's preference, whether that is admiring how a certain food looks. And then the fourth step is to address how it feels in your body. So whether that is your mind is racing, your heart is beating more quickly, you feel a little bit tense, like actually physically relaxing your body. And then the fifth step, which I was like, it's kind of 4.5, is practice. And that is a key step for changing any of the things that I talk about in this podcast is if we do not practice it. So let's say we do this twice and we're like, it doesn't work. Yeah, of course it doesn't work because you tried it twice, right? And this is where having support and coaching can be so powerful because I'm there when it does feel hard and I'm there when it does feel uncomfortable and we get to work on, well, how do we actually take this step by step so that you get to the point where you have that peace of mind around food. So I want to walk you through these steps so that you can kind of walk away with an idea of where to start if you are mentally calculating calories. And before that, I want to share the self-trust starter kit with you really quickly, because if you are someone who feels like you often sort of like make an impulsive decision and then you regret it, or you feel like you cannot trust yourself unless you have a very specific plan, it's likely that you're not super clear on your values, and your self-trust has likely been eroded from years of trying to follow different plans or being told that you can't trust yourself, you compare yourself to others, or you continually tell yourself like just need to be more disciplined. And self-trust is a skill that you can build and learn. And that skill starts with knowing what is truly important to you at your core, like the principles that are like, this is important to Gillian, right? And that gives you purpose. It drives those deeper motivations. It helps you stay motivated towards whatever your goals are because it's connected to what's deeper for you. And I've put the first lessons, the first steps to building self-trust into a mini course. It's a free mini course. It's linked in the show notes, and it will help you define your values and also start understanding and practicing values aligned decision making. So make sure you download that. I think you're going to find it very helpful if you resonate with what I talk about in my podcast episodes. So with that, let's talk about the steps of this process to let go of mentally calculating calories. So the first step is being able to recognize like food has other functions than just calories, right? We know calories are just units of energy. We want to also start thinking about, well, what are other reasons that I might want to eat something? Because it's easy to forget, especially if we've been in this habit of calculating calories or counting calories or macros or whatever, is we forget that our bodies are not just calorie calculators. Our bodies are dynamic, they are flexible. We need a different amount of energy on different days, depending on what we do, depending on how we feel, depending on our sleep, so many things. So, for example, what a lot of my clients notice is that when they start paying attention to things like hunger and fullness rather than just calorie counts, if you eat more one day, your hunger will likely downregulate the next day. You won't be as hungry. You'll also notice, like, oh, if I was way more active today, I might be a bit more hungry tomorrow. And when we start to notice these things, we can also start to respond to them without being so rigid as far as calories. And this sometimes can be helpful to remember is that legally in the US, there is allowed to be up to a 20% error in calorie counts on packaging. So while we tell ourselves like, ooh, if I know exactly how many calories I eat, I'm safe, it's actually just as accurate to rely on your body or other criteria, right? I also want to reassure you that if at first you're like, hey, I'm going to pay less attention to calories, and you notice that you start choosing foods that are higher calorie that you didn't before, that's a normal experience. And it is not going to last forever. You're not going to always want to eat the higher calorie option for the rest of your life, right? And I know sometimes it's hard to hear that and believe it, but you will over time, like your body wants to eat food that nourishes it, right? But if we've been restricting certain foods because they're higher calorie, it's totally normal to want to eat more of those foods at first when we're learning this process of being more flexible. And so, considering some other functions of food outside of just giving us calories, it's what's convenient in the moment. Is like sometimes we just need to grab what's convenient, no matter how many calories are in there. Culture, so eating like cultural foods or going traveling and eating the foods there, sharing food and experiencing food through relationships, eating food just because it tastes really good or it's a fun experience to like go and try something. And we also want to remember that sometimes the reasons why we eat are symptoms. They are signs of, oh, there's something else going on, right? So our urges to eat are not always something that we need to say, like, either, oh, this is okay because it fits into my day and it's fuel, or this is bad because I shouldn't be craving this food. It's a symptom. So, for example, let's say you've noticed a desire to eat chocolate and you're like, I'm not actually hungry right now. And I don't know where this urge came from. You might want to check in and be like, oh, well, what are my emotions doing right now? Right? Because how many calories that chocolate has, if you're feeling lonely or upset or frustrated and you have an urge to eat chocolate, how many calories it has doesn't matter. What does matter is what is this urge telling me about what I need, right? Because often we'll be like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'll eat one piece of chocolate because it's only, I don't know, however many calories. But even though you're eating what seems like a quote unquote low calorie snack, it's still not getting to the root of what is actually happening, right? So recognizing the function of food and why we eat is a really important part of starting to reduce this urge to constantly count calories. The next step is to allow ourselves to notice that this is just a thought. You are not ChatGPT. Just because your brain like gives you a direction or tells you something doesn't mean that you have to do that thing or that you even have to follow it or believe it, right? You can be in charge of your mind. We often can't control our initial thoughts. So that initial thought of the calorie count might pop up in your head. You don't have to listen to it. Our thoughts are mental events. They are not directives. They are not something that we have to follow, right? And mental calorie calculations are like any other thought. They pop in and out. We can choose to take it as a directive of like, oh, like I shouldn't eat more than this many calories, so now that's actually what I should do. Or we can see it as no more than it actually is. This is a thought that popped into my head. I get to choose what I do with it, right? So, part of the work that we do in coaching is we spend time discussing different common thoughts that pop up around food or body and understand, well, in the past, what have those thoughts driven as far as like actions are concerned, right? So, if I think, for example, that has too many calories, does that mean that I immediately do not eat that thing, even though I might want to eat the thing, or it might be part of a cultural experience, or it might be part of like spending time with friends and family, right? And so being able to recognize those thoughts and then remember we get to choose what actions we do is a really powerful part of taking ownership over your behavior. And this is not about fighting with our thoughts. This is not about telling that thought, like, don't think about calories. That's bad. Like, you shouldn't do that. No, no, no. It's simply accepting, like, oh, hey, there's this thought, but I get to choose what action I take, right? And so bringing awareness to the fact that mentally calculating calories is just a thought, it's just a thought pattern. And you can also consider how many thoughts do I have in a day that I choose not to act on? And there are a lot of them. But what often happens is when it comes to something like food or calories is we often tend to like fight against the thought, we bargain with it, we try to change the thought. And sometimes it's more helpful to just be like, oh, there's the thought, but I'm actually going to do the more values aligned thing, right? Next step, give your mind other criteria to focus on. So instead of being like, don't mentally calculate calories, think about, hey, I'm going to think about the taste of this food. I'm going to think about what I feel like eating. I'm going to think about how this food looks. I'm going to think about the experience that I'm having right now. Because we know from experience that telling our brains not to think a thought doesn't work. But giving our brains something else to think about is really, really helpful. And so in coaching, what we would do is we would create some new definitions and new directions for your mind. So a question I might ask you in coaching is, if you don't want to think about calories when you choose what to eat, what do you want to think about, right? So we need some type of criteria. We're not just going to say like, ooh, I saw this food and then I'm going to shove it in my mouth. That's not functional for our lives. But we want to think about what criteria might be more helpful for the type of relationship I want to have with food. And this doesn't mean that we just eliminate any thoughts of calories. It doesn't mean that we just pretend that calories don't count. But it helps you expand your view of how you choose what to eat. So for example, it can get to a point where you're like, hey, I can look at nutrition labels and I can be aware of calories, but that doesn't control the choices that I make, right? The next step is if you notice that your body is feeling tense, maybe your heart is racing, maybe this is like, hey, I'm feeling a little bit threatened right now, right? And those body sensations can change the way that we respond because we might freeze, we might want to like die, like barrel through. It's the fight, flight, fawn, or freeze type mode, right? It's a stress mode. And it can be really hard to make thoughtful choices. It can be hard to think clearly or act calmly when we're in this mode. And it can be really helpful when you notice this to have a go-to sort of like breathing method or to practice grounding. A lot of what we will work on in coaching is developing a grounding practice where when you notice that you're sort of in this mode, can you come back to a specific sense? So can you feel your feet on the floor? Can you feel your butt in the chair? And that can get us out of sort of the mental storm and back into our bodies. And so I have one client, for example, that she likes to ground by when she feels really activated, she will step away to the bathroom for a second and she'll put her hand on her heart and breathe. I have other clients who don't necessarily remove themselves from the situation. They will just focus on the sensation of like their butt in the chair or their feet on the floor. And then the last step here is this takes practice. And right now, the calorie calculating voice in your head might be really, really loud. It might be the loudest voice in your head when you're choosing food. As you practice, as you notice those thoughts and choose your action intentionally, as you calm your body, as you think about the other things that you've decided are important in choosing food, you're starting to quiet that voice. And it's not linear. I want to make this really clear is that this process is not linear because especially in moments of stress, like let's say you are having a really stressful week in your relationship or in your social life or sorry, in your work life, whatever. It is normal for us to revert back to old habits and old patterns in moments of stress. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's not that you are backtracking. Excuse me, I need a sip of water. Oh my gosh, so much better. It's not that you are backtracking. It's not that you are not progressing. It is that we tend to revert to our established patterns and our established habits in moments of stress. However, as we learn and practice and as we stay sort of persistent in this practice, you will notice that when stressful moments come up, then you're less likely to go back into like the full blown old habit, right? So it is not a linear process, but you will start to see in those really tough moments, you'll start to see that maybe it doesn't get quite as bad as it used to, right? And in the good moments, you will see that big progress. But I think one of the things that is really it tends to come up quite a lot is this like, oh, I felt like I was making progress with this, and then I had a setback, and now all of a sudden I feel like I've done something wrong or I'm not progressing. And that's absolutely not the case. It is extremely normal in times of stress for old habits to pop back in. And over time, that will get better. So, your takeaways: letting go of mental calorie calculations is 100% possible, but it is not an overnight thing. I like to think of it as, let's say that voice is screaming at you right now. Over time, it will get down to a whisper where you won't even be able to hear it some of the time. And it's really helpful when you can start recognizing a few important pieces of information. One, food has a lot more functions than just fuel, and our bodies are dynamic from day to day. Calorie calculations aren't accurate, anyways. Your thoughts are not facts, and you do not have to act on them. Your mind doesn't stop thinking about something just because you say, hey, mind, stop thinking about this thing. So, having other criteria to think about is really, really helpful. And then the last thing to remember is that mindfulness goes a really long way. And mindfulness, as you've heard me talk about in the podcast before, is not, oh, I have to be really slow and I have to stop everything and I need 20 minutes. Mindfulness can simply be like the grounding that I talked about of, ooh, okay, I feel my butt in the chair. I'm just going to focus on that sensation right now. So, is it possible to stop mentally calculating calories and break out of that sort of like mental prison? 100%. And it takes practice. It may take guidance. This is something that we often think that we can just kind of willpower ourselves out of it, or we quote unquote should know better. And those patterns of thinking can be really, really damaging because it keeps us from getting the support that we need. And one of the best things I ever did for myself in my relationship with food was actually asking for support and opening up about what was going on, because for so long I was like, this is just something wrong with me. And it's not. It's absolutely not. There are so many other people that deal with this, and there's so many ways for you to get to a point where you feel like calm and at peace and like chill around food. It is possible. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. If you want more support, coaching details are in the show notes. And I hope you are having a lovely day.